Okay, hear me out. You know that feeling when you finally get home after a long day, or if you work from home like me, you close your office door for the night and you just breathe and you exhale. Everyone breathe. That's what your space should feel like a sanctuary, a place where you can truly unwind, let go of the stress, and just be. This is advice I'm giving to myself because I've been taking on a lot at work. And at the end of the day, if your bed is not the most inviting, relaxing, luxurious part of your home, we need to talk. Like, what are you doing? So here's the thing. Your 5 to 9 is just as important as your 9 to 5. You deserve rest that actually restores you, and that starts with Cozy Earth. I'm so excited to be working with Cozy Earth because I have used their products before even working with them. This is a dream, okay? And you're going to have amazing dreams when you hear the rest of this. I have the Cozy Earth bamboo sheet set, and let me tell you, I even asked my husband for a review so I could talk to you about this. These sheets are so breathable. You literally sleep cooler. And by the way, I run very warm. Like, I cannot have a bed or like sheets or anything, a comforter that are warm or make me sweat because it's inevitable. So having sheets like this bamboo sheet set that I have from Cozy Earth is a game changer. It's literally several degrees cooler. There's no more overheating, no more tossing and turning, and the fabric is next level in terms of softness. Cozy Earth only uses the best materials, so you feel like you're wrapped in pure comfort. Plus, their durable weave means no pilling ever. And I hate pilling. All of my sweaters are pilling, and I just can't stand it. And then you end up having to do all this extra work to depill. But the good news, as I said, is that Cozy Earth's materials mean that there's no pilling ever, and it's guaranteed for 10 years. Let's also talk about their bamboo pajamas, because if you're still sleeping in that old stretched out t-shirt, it is time for an upgrade. These are lightweight but cozy, designed to help you fall asleep faster and stay asleep longer types of pajamas. It's the kind of comfort that makes you want to lounge all day. And by the way, I don't know if my mom is going to hear this, but this is what I'm going to get her for Mother's Day. Mother's Day is coming up, and this is terrible, but I always end up being like, oh my gosh, it's Mother's Day. But now, luckily, I have a heads up, and I'm reminding myself and you that Mother's Day is coming up. So buy your mother, your spouse, your dog mom, something amazing like these bamboo pajamas or the sheet set to really make their Mother's Day special. As a matter of fact, I'm going to ask my husband to get me the bamboo pajamas because I am sleeping in that old stretched out t-shirt and it is time for an upgrade. So here's the thing. What I really love about Cozy Earth is that they're committed to quality in every way. Their products aren't just luxurious, they're ethically made and responsibly produced. So when you invest in better sleep, you're also investing in something good. And if you're not sure if it's for you, totally fine, no worries. Cozy Earth gives you 100 nights to decide. 100! And if you don't love it, you can send it back. And with that, there's a 10-year warranty, so you know that they believe in their products. So if you're ready to turn your bedroom into a true retreat, one that feels like a luxury hotel, but better, go to CozyEarth.com and use my code HUMANHR for 40% off their best-selling sheets, pajamas, towels, and more. That's 40% off. That is like the best deal ever. And if you get a post-purchase survey, by the way, please let them know that you heard about Cozy Earth right here on the Bringing the Human Back to Human Resources podcast, because it is so helpful for them to know that my discussion with you about having this most fabulous 5 to 9 after your 9 to 5 impacted you in some way. And by the way, like I said, the first thing that I'm buying, not only for my mother, but also for the other mothers in my life, are those cozy, fabulous bamboo pajamas. So let's prioritize sleep, prioritize you, sleep better with Cozy Earth. Welcome to the Bringing the Human Back to Human Resources podcast. I'm Traci Chernoff, and I've spent my entire professional career in HR. Each week, we'll explore the delicate balance between people and business with the aim to reconnect the two and create meaningful outcomes. Listen in as I share my own experiences, challenge the status quo, and chat with guests from various industries about our mission to bring the human back to human resources. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Bringing the Human Back to Human Resources podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in for another week. This is our next month of the Policy Pulse segment, which I do with Bryan Driscoll, as you know, our resident non-practicing attorney. Is that right? Is that like the best way to probably describe how you approach your JD?
I describe myself as a recovering lawyer, but the way you described it is fine too. Yes.
Okay, fair enough. I'm like, as I said that, am I spreading a rumor? All right, amazing. I love that. Our resident recovering attorney. And so we're gonna, as if you listen to our Policy Pulse segment from last month, we generally take a pretty similar approach. We're going to talk about various topics that are pretty relevant to the United States, especially in the present moment. We try to record these as close to the air date as possible for that purpose. And then we'll talk a little bit about how these different things that we talk about impact employers, any suggestions that we might have. And then, of course, we'll look at what might be on the horizon. So with that, our first topic is quite intense. So everyone brace yourselves just a bit, but we're not going to go through the full subject of it. And that is on this immigration enforcement, the heightened immigration enforcement that we're seeing in the United States. So of course, Bryan will explain this way better than I can, but as we know, there's been an increased government focus on work site enforcement of immigration laws and auditing employer compliance with employment eligibility verification, such as the I-9. So, Bryan, I'll pass to you. What are some of the impacts of this heightened enforcement in immigration?
So there are a lot, and I guess I would want to start by reminding people that when it comes to potentially legally hazardous issues like this, or any other complex HR issues, if your first instinct is not calling your employment lawyer, ignore your first instinct, because you should always call your lawyer when it comes to issues like this. I mean, with the ICE raids and the focus on immigration, it spans everything from anxiety from not only business owners and HR professionals, but also individual employees, and not just those who may not have proper documentation, but everyone, all the way to worry about how you are compliant with your I-9s, with any e-verify that you're doing, with any other type of compliance, because who knows when and where ICE or an I-9 audit team may show up at your business, regardless of what industry you're in or what state you're in. We are seeing some pushback in certain states, but I think the biggest takeaway here for employers and for HR professionals specifically is twofold, really. One, if ICE shows up at your office door, you need to make sure that you're being respectful and compliant, but you can also ask for any documentation that they have that allows them to be there. You could find yourself in trouble if you try to block them, if you don't think they have jurisdiction to be there. So be careful with doing things like that. Again, refer back to my initial instinct, call your lawyer. But it can also create difficulties for everyone involved, and that's where we go back to sort of the I-9 focus, making sure that your documentation is always in order, making sure that when you hire somebody new, you go through the I-9 process. You have to do it for every single employee that you hire, and you have to keep that record on file. Recommendation is you keep it separate from all other employee files and medical files, like you just have an I-9 folder in a locked drawer in a locked room. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of the big issues here. One directly related to ICE and immigration enforcement over the last couple of months, and one sort of more broadly speaking of just generally good business practice.
Yeah, thank you for walking us through that. And compliance is always a good thing to have best practices on. Compliance is always a good thing to feel like you have a handle over. And I-9s had basically a facelift. What was it, a couple years ago, when they were like, oh, hey, like from, COVID and onward, we kind of allowed a lot of flexibility, and we're going to take that back. So there was this need, and I even talked about it in an episode. It feels like it was forever ago, but it was probably only like a year or so ago. I talked about in an episode how you really, like, that was an opportunity to really like scrub your data, and scrub not meaning to get rid of, but to actually ensure that it's clean and that you're compliant and that your processes are good. And so I think this is very good advice that, go back to your I-9 process. Make sure that you, whether it's you or another operator or someone has to own this process and has to own it with a very clear best practice. And beyond that, also, I think the other good piece of advice that you shared is like, call your attorney. And actually, that's good advice anytime you're in doubt of something, because your attorney is going to be able to support with that. And, I know there are listeners, a lot of listeners who work for smaller businesses, maybe moms and pops, and that might lend to them saying, well, I don't have an attorney. Like, what does someone do in that event if they are confronted with a government response in this type of situation and they don't have someone like an employment attorney to call?
So I think there's two answers to that. One is that, in my view, and I may be biased in this view, you should always have a lawyer. Whether it's somebody that you're paying every month on retainer to help you with certain things as your business grows, or you're a true, like, really small business, 5, 10, 20 employees, and you just have somebody that you pay hourly and they just bill you as you pick up the phone and call them for issues. Always have a contact you can pick up the phone and call. That, I think, is an important point. If you don't have that, and you don't have the ability to do that right now, then you do need somebody that you can trust, whether that's somebody internal on your HR team who has the background and the education and the experience to navigate these complexities, or someone like me, who is a vendor for you, a consultant for you, who may have a little bit more experience than somebody in-house. And again, with someone like me who has that legal background anyway, that's always helpful as well. But that is sort of the advice, is to not do it alone. You have to, these are super complex issues. And you need to have somebody who knows what they're talking about, not somebody who's just going to give you an answer because you're looking for an answer. You need somebody who can give you the right answer, and quickly.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I agree. It's a good idea to always have an attorney, not necessarily in your corner, but like on speed dial. I mean, I'm fortunate I have some attorneys in the family, but I also have attorneys that I've worked with either in the businesses that I've worked for or within my own business. And it is definitely really important to know that you have someone who can protect not just your interests, but your business, and mitigate whatever risk you might have when you operate in such a way that isn't compliant or lawful or thoughtful, depending on what the circumstance is. And, I think just to kind of round this out, I've been in like the corporate world for like over 10 years, let's say. I've never had to experience this. I have worked with immigration attorneys to support with like visa transfers and petitions and green cards and all that stuff, which is awesome. And while I've never experienced this, it doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. But the best case scenario is that you're prepared. So anyone listening who's like, that'll never happen to me, that's fine. I hope it never happens to you or someone at your workplace, because it is so complex and sounds like a lot of work and a lot of legal fees. But at the end of the day, it is a good idea to, it's kind of like, what it's like? It's like when you take a CPR class and you're like, I'm never going to need that, but you've taken it. And so it's like in the back of your brain. So God forbid you need that. You know how to do CPR. Hopefully you actually, use those skills so you keep them fresh. But you get what I'm saying. It's like, if you have some of that information, you have some of that knowledge, then maybe when the time comes where you need to kind of like tap into that knowledge or tap into those skills, you're going with the right gut instinct, which is call your attorney.
Exactly. And it's helpful too when you develop a relationship with someone, even if you're not talking to them every week, every month, they know your business. They don't need all the background, so it can speed up the process to get to the answer. Because even though there is some commonality amongst all of these different situations, whether you're an office, you're a farm, or whatever, like there's some commonality about the process and what happens when immigration shows up at your business. But there are some unique nuances to each of those situations as well, and that's where having an employment lawyer on speed dial that at least knows the background of your business, you can get to the answer more quickly. You don't have to provide all the background and talk about when certain employees were hired and the documentation process that you have in place and all this. Like the lawyer is going to know that already.
Right. That's a great point. Such a great point. And it's really nice. It's kind of like I always bring it back to something that's like not related to HR or law or whatever, but it's like, you have that best friend from high school or childhood, and like you don't have to tell them who you are. They just know who you are. They know exactly how you grew up. And that's like your attorney who gets to know your business. They know exactly what all the ins and outs look like. And some businesses do have in-house counsel, which maybe would make this a bit easier, even though they're not always employment attorneys, and most often are not immigration attorneys either. But at least there's someone who's like, "Ooh, yeah, don't touch this. We will figure out the next best step. I have a contact for that." That's one of your better cases of the scenarios. So thank you, Bryan, for walking us through that. And of course, if anyone has questions specific to that, please, let us know. The second topic here, which actually I thought about it, I'm like, do you think that they didn't announce it on April 1st because it was April Fool's Day? Because this has to do with the sweeping new tariffs on imports, and they were announced on April 2nd. And I'm like, there's gotta be a reason it wasn't April 1st. And I think it's probably because everyone would be like, April Fools, right? Well, no,
He
not April.
actually
Yeah.
No, Trump actually said that a couple weeks ago that
Oh.
he was going to announce this on April 2nd because he didn't want people to think it
Oh,
was an April
really?
Fool's joke. Yeah.
Oh my God. See, I try to like avoid the news at all costs these days. So you are my news source at this point. That's so funny. I mean, it's not funny, but it is funny in a way that I'm like, do you think? Well, debunked there, everybody. It's true. All right, so let's talk about what this is. Broad new tariffs, which are effectively a 10% baseline plus some higher rates, were announced, as Bryan said, April 2nd, making most imported goods more expensive for U.S. companies. There happens to be quite a bit of information related to tariffs that we probably can also clarify, because I think generally people see tariffs either one way or another, and they don't necessarily understand that there's this, impact on cost of goods for the U.S., for the importer, so to speak, just as much as there is necessarily for the exporter, but especially on the importer. So in plain language here, the higher cost of imported goods certainly squeezes the businesses financially, and this is intended to boost the domestic industry. So especially we're talking about the US here, it's intended to drive our industry locally, and it also often forces companies to cut costs elsewhere because of those increased costs for domestic products. My understanding of tariffs is that it's kind of like a long-term thing, that you don't really see anything in terms of savings or more exports from the U.S., for example, which I believe is what tariffs are trying to do, is that they're trying to get U.S. businesses to do more U.S. business. This is a very, like, when I think back to my AP micro class that I took in high school, like, this is what I remember. So please don't quote me on all of this. So, but at the same time, I think this is where sometimes the misconception is that it does increase prices like significantly in the interim until that, because you can't just like flip a switch and then start to create your product in the US if you've had a plant or a warehouse or a manufacturing site overseas. So I don't know, Bryan, you're probably a good person to pass to at this point to walk us through some of that.
Yeah, and I think that's a good analysis, Traci, because essentially it raises prices across the board. And unfortunately, when companies raise prices, they usually don't lower them later on.
Right. Yeah.
So, this is kind of the new normal, and it will only get worse from here. And here's an example to your point about, trying to increase domestic production.
Mm-hmm.
Let's take one of my favorite subjects, wine.
Oh, wasn't sure where you were going with that.
So wine, obviously is made all over the world. And so there are imports that are coming from Europe that we are already seeing even before yesterday's April 2nd's announcement. The price has gone up. But the price has also gone up domestically. And that's because the world isn't, the last time we had a real major tariff standoff like this was about 100 years ago. And the world is very different than what it was 100 years ago, much more interconnected. Mm-hmm. And so using wine as an example, you would think, hey, if we buy California wine, the prices will be the same. Well, their production costs have also gone up, right? Because most cork on earth comes from one country, Portugal. So the cork imported to Napa wineries is going to cost them more than what it cost them 2 months ago. So that's going to increase their production costs. And so even if we do focus more on domestic production, and even if consumers do buy more domestic products, the prices are still going to go up. Number one, because the market will allow those prices to go up because international products will be raising their prices. But number two, because nothing is made entirely within the confines of the United States.
Interesting. I love that we're using wine to think about that. And it's a really good point. I had no idea that cork was only found in Portugal, made in Portugal. I have a pair of cork heels actually that I really love. So I guess they're Portuguese or they were imported. Wow, that's kind of cool. This is a cool fact. I did not know that. But nevertheless, it's a good point that, which was one of your original points, that once prices go up, they generally are not going to come down. If like, for example, eggs, I go to Costco, go to BJ's, and if I wanted to get 5 dozen eggs, which I don't, they're $30. Fortunately, I don't need 5 dozen eggs, and the other, 2 dozen or however many eggs is still more economical. However, when I think about the people, I recently bought a minivan. The listeners know this. I've become a full minivan mom, and I love it. I'm never looking back, but I talked about how I was going to buy a minivan. I don't remember. Maybe it was with you. I think it was with, I can't remember. Maybe it was with you actually on one of our episodes. And I was speaking with the salesperson because we were just waiting for the registration. Come on, New York, be faster. And he was like, we just went to Costco or BJ's, wherever, and eggs were $30. And we bought them and we put them in our fridge. And the next morning, our toddler opened the fridge and cracked all the eggs. When I tell you, I was like, do you want my $30? I was like ready to write him a check. I mean, I felt terrible for him. And then I was like, why did you buy those eggs? My husband and I both asked him, why did you buy those eggs? Why the $30 eggs? He was like, they were the only eggs there. And so I share this, so that you also feel the pain that I felt when I imagined his toddler cracking 5 dozen eggs. Can you imagine cleaning that up? Every single egg. But also because he bought those eggs. Someone who effectively earns a living on a commission. I mean, as much as I love my minivan, I don't know how many people actually a lot of people buy minivans, but still, I don't know necessarily that he's affording or able to afford $30 eggs. I certainly find that to be an extreme premium. But he paid for them. And so as long as there's demand, then that price, what would incentivize that supplier to make less? If eventually, even if their costs reduce over time, if they're making $30 on 5 dozen eggs, why wouldn't they continue to make $30 or charge $30? Doesn't mean that's their full profit, obviously, but why wouldn't they continue to do that? And then to me, this is really why I was not excited, but glad that we were talking about this, is that we have to, as HR leaders, we have to do we have to work harder, I think, to really understand the business impact, because that's how we're taken more seriously as business partners, when we really understand industry and micro and macro impacts and things like that. And it's not to say that you have to go and get your MBA, but if you can understand like supply, demand, cost, savings, and all of that, then you can do a better job of understanding and articulating where cost savings are coming from, because generally payroll and people costs, so to speak, are the most expensive parts of businesses. And so if we understand that costs are going to go up for businesses, then the only way for them to either continue to drive a profit or reduce their losses is either to make more, sell more, drive more profit, whatever that looks like, which is much harder to do, or to cut their costs, starting with people. And so that's where, like we have to take it home for our purposes. Like, how do we support the businesses that we work for to stretch their runway as far as possible, be as fiscally responsible as much as possible, in order not to see this fallout impacting people.
Yeah, and I think that's a great way to sort of combine these two parts of this discussion. That one, prices are going up and not coming down, and they won't. And two, the impact on people, which I think is an important discussion to have, because it is the people that provide the profit in the end for the business.
Right.
But they're often the first to go when the business is looking to hoard cash or cut costs.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, that's probably one of the most common subjects I've been talking with clients about over the last couple of months, is not necessarily doing layoffs, though there have been a couple, but sort of evaluating the options, about what's the best way to go about this if we need to. Again, being compliant, what notices do we need to provide, all that fun stuff, but also just from a purely human perspective of like, how do we do this with empathy? If this is what we end up needing to do as a business, how do we go about this process and treat these people like humans?
Yeah.
And my answer to that, we don't need to go down this rabbit hole too far, but like my answer to that is transparency. Tell your employees, especially when you're a small business, people know.
Yeah.
Tell your employees what's going on. That doesn't mean that they're going to jump ship immediately. Job market's hard right now, so they may not even be able to if they wanted to. But just be transparent. Keep those conversations open. Have those discussions. And if you do have to do layoffs, gives people as much notice as possible. Be kind, be human, be empathetic, and treat people the way that you would want to be treated, that you would expect to be treated. Because I think we're going to see a lot more of that over the next couple of months. Even if, like a couple of weeks ago, these tariffs sort of evaporate in the next couple of days, we're still going to see it, because there's a ton of uncertainty in the job market, in the economy, in business generally right now. And businesses tend to get protectionist when there's uncertainty.
Yeah.
And so I think we're going to see more layoffs. We're going to see more of this, unfortunately, which, to your point about eggs, then makes it harder for people to go buy eggs. Not only because the prices are high, but now because they've lost their source of income.
Yeah, it's a really tough spot to be in and to reconcile with, because we've already been experiencing obviously difficult economic conditions. I mean, even I think I've probably mentioned it on the podcast, like you go and look at the housing market, and I don't know if you remember that viral video back in the 2010s where it's like, the rent is too damn high. Like the rent is too damn high. I mean, like we're talking about, and for anyone who's like Gen Z, you might not know, but I really hope you do, because that was a great time. But you look at like the cost of living, especially in a high cost of living area like where I am in New York, the between the mortgages and the rents, and then also groceries and gas, and to top it all off, having higher taxes. It's the pressure that is put on the, like a nuclear family, an individual, a couple is quite insurmountable sometimes. Like you really feel that. And then, sometimes I get questions from, actually, I get questions sometimes from like employees, new hires, candidates, and then also even through my podcast where people are like, well, how do raises work? Like, do they take into consideration inflation? And I think we've probably talked about it at some point. Like, the answer is kind of no, because how do you like it when there is inflation and there's an increase that, let's say, takes that into consideration, it works into the recipient's benefit in that case. But when inflation goes down, if someone's relying on that, you don't want less of a budget increase or less of a pay increase, right? Like, so generally speaking, I feel like in the experience that I've had, finance teams, companies in general will kind of say, okay, we can't really compete with inflation, but like, let's look at what our overall budget is, make sure it's fair and consistent and adequate in order to support all of these increases that need to happen across a year. But people don't love that, because when you have like 5, 6, 7% inflation, depending on where you are, even in the world, it's stifling. So
Yeah, and I've seen a lot of companies, especially over the past couple of years, sort of do a twofold approach when it comes to annual increases. One is doing a cost of living, a COLA increase annually, just across the board. Everybody on January 1st, everybody, whatever the government said the cost of living increase was last year, you automatically get that. And then there's performance on top of that.
Right.
And I think that's a great way to go about it, because it, sure, if inflation, hits hard in January or February, then you don't get that cost of living increase for 10 more months. So that kind of can be a hurt. But at least businesses, in my view, are doing the right thing. They're covering what it costs to live in wherever you are, and they're separating that from your performance and from your traditional raise annually.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's a great point to make too. And again, for those listening who are part of smaller businesses, you might not have even received an increase in the last 2 years. And that's hard. At the same time, I think when I put all of this into perspective, the job market is hard. Things are really expensive. I think that we will probably see more people not even wanting to ask for more, like maybe being a little bit more trepidatious when it comes to saying, I want to get paid more, I want to get paid more, I want to get paid more. Because again, when we think about like all of the macro elements here, it's like the higher the cost to the business, like fully, 360, let's say, all around, the more pressure it puts on the business to either outperform what they were performing or to cut costs. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see less of that like strong-armed approach that we saw in the last few years, which I think is great that people were really advocating for themselves. And I'm certainly not suggesting to stop that. But I've even seen fewer people just like complaining. And it's not to say that people like always complain to me at work or on the podcast, but I generally will hear like, I want to look for a new job because I don't like this environment, or I don't want this, or I want to get paid more, or my title's not right. And I'm not really hearing that as much. And I think that there is a correlation between that and not wanting to rock the boat, so to speak. Again, not right or wrong. It's just something I'm noticing.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I've had conversations. I partner with some individuals as well, help them navigate, complex situations, career transitions, stuff like that. And I've had some discussions with folks who come to me basically with what you just said about, I should be making more. Like, I have the market data to show that, but I also don't want to rock the boat. Like, how do I have this discussion? And, my perspective is, yes, you should be making more, period. End of story. Like that would, in a utopia, that's how it would work. Mm-hmm. But in this world that we're in right now, to your point, you need to make a business case for it. Sometimes in real small businesses, sometimes there just isn't money for raises. And, Right or wrong, people have to understand that. But
Yeah.
if there is, and you can make a business case for it, why you should be making more, whether it's because you're in sales and you've brought in X percent more, 25, 50% more than you did last year, or the market has changed and your position, whatever it is, you are sufficiently underpaid for your geographic region and your industry. It's never a guarantee, but present your case. Think almost like a lawyer. Make your argument. Why should the employer give you a raise beyond a cost of living, or something more traditional? Why should they give you a larger piece of the pie?
Right. This is a big thing on this podcast, everyone, is like having the data, knowing how to articulate your data, and really being able to create a story around what you do, what you've done. It's probably one of the hardest things that someone can upskill for themselves in their careers, and it's also the most important. Like if you can really qualify and quantify data that you have, you're totally set, because it's a personal skill, it's a professional skill. It's going to help you when it comes to presenting on like regular HR things and also your own personal individual goals. So I think that's great advice. And I know like I said, we'd probably hit our 30-minute mark. So we're closing in on the end of our segment, but I know we have something that we're kind of looking ahead to. It's still pending. Do you want to share a little bit about that?
Yeah, and I think I'll loop it in with a couple of sort of pending cases that we see. There's, again, as we talked about last time, there's just so much that is yet to be settled, whether it comes from executive orders or it comes from administrative agencies changing their policies and their tactics. There's just a lot of legal challenges happening right now, and there's a lot that's still to be settled. But there's a few things that we're keeping an eye on. One of them we mentioned last time, and that was the Intuit and HireVue case with AI discriminating against an employee. So that's something to definitely keep an eye on as people and companies use more and more AI in HR. There's also a case, Stanley v. City of Sanford, Florida, about post-employment benefits and how the ADA applies in those situations for employees who may have been disabled in some fashion, either at work or outside of work, and what they're eligible for. There's also a religious case that the Supreme Court heard just a couple of days ago, Catholic Charities versus Wisconsin, that it talks about the religious exemptions, whether religious nonprofits need to pay unemployment tax, how they're taxed. And it sounds like the court is probably going to broaden what is considered a religious business. So more companies might fall under, more nonprofits might fall under this umbrella of avoiding unemployment taxes and some other taxes. So those are some, again, still waiting to be settled, but those are some of the key ones that I'm sort of keeping an eye on.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Bryan. I mean, every policy segment policy pulse segment seems to offer more and more insight into just how important it is to kind of keep an eye on what's going on that has some sort of impact on businesses and individuals. And it honestly really, I think, further validates why having HR support, whether it's in-house or via consultants or contractors, is so important for businesses. And then obviously with that also have an attorney that you could call. So thank you so much. And for everyone listening, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. And if you have a question about anything that we've talked about, or if you want us to talk about something specific, just leave a comment on the Spotify or the YouTube episode, or send us an email. You can send me an email at contact@hrtraci.com. You can reach out to either myself or Bryan on LinkedIn. All of our contact info is always in the show notes. So Bryan, thank you so much for another month of the Policy Pulse segment. I'm sure we'll have a lot to discuss next month also, but appreciate it always.
Absolutely. Thank you, Traci.
Thanks. Hey, just before you go, don't forget to subscribe to the show so that you are the first to hear when an episode drops each week. And maybe leave a 5-star review and a comment about how much you loved this episode. Plus, if you have someone in mind who would really enjoy this episode, make sure you share it with them. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you next week.